Ready? I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order today, the Jackson County Board of Commissioners, our work session. And just sort of a housekeeping note here, Commissioner Stribling can't be with us in person today, but he is participating by Zoom. See him on the screen there, and so we'll welcome Tom. He's still feeling a little under the weather, so he'll be participating remotely. And with that being said, I'm going to recognize our county manager, as I customarily do, and let him walk us through these various topics today on our work session agenda.
Yes, sir. First item, we do have Mr. Breedlove back from the Jackson County TDA. And if you recall, when he gave a report to the board at his last presentation, he did mention an upcoming capital program. And today's topic of conversation is the proposed TDA Tourism Capital Project Fund.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
So we've been successful in our marketing, and I did read a newspaper article recently that it left it a little bit vague, but it seemed like we spend a couple $100 million on advertising. I do want to clear that up, that we spend roughly about $1.7 million to bring in almost $300 million. So,
Exactly.
so yes. Today I'm here to present on our capital project fund, and with the agenda packet, you've got the 13-page application, but I thought it might be helpful, rather than go through that line by line, is to hit the high points and first talk about what capital projects are. So since the beginning of the TDA in around 2012, we were talking about what we can do with some of that money spent by visitors to enhance the community. So this has been a conversation that's been going on since 2012. And in about the last year and a half, we've formed a great foundation to be able to create this program. So when we talk about capital projects, typically we're talking about brick and mortar projects, things that are visible. So like convention centers, arenas, sports facilities. We get a lot of questions about why we don't have certain sports arenas for youth, things of that nature. Performing arts venues, parks, greenways, and trails, placemaking. So something that makes Jackson County something that it's known for in terms of notoriety of a project of sorts. Visitor centers, we're not proposing any of those. We have two excellent ones, but that's another example of a brick and mortar project. And then wayfinding signage to help people get around. These are some examples, and I included these so you would be familiar with examples in Jackson County of what other destinations have spent funding on. So things like Greenway, you'll see that Asheville's Convention Center, they spend money on Greenway projects in Asheville to benefit the public because visitors also use those. The wayfinding signage in downtown Silva, the Appalachian Women's Museum. So museums are an example of things that tourism bureaus spend money to support, and then performing arts venues. I do want to stress that the projects are not limited to this, and these are just examples, but the possibilities are pretty wide open for what we can fund. So we do this for the community benefit. So visitors come here, they spend money, but we want to reinvest those funds to benefit both the visitor, but also our residents, something for our residents to enjoy as well. Economic impact, placemaking, and it's not on here, but competitiveness with neighboring counties. We want to invest in projects in Jackson that generate economic impact in Jackson. Increased demand for accommodations. A lot of times you hear that referred to as room nights, getting more people to stay here. And then increasing local spending. If people have more things to do on their trip here, they're going to stay longer and spend more money. That benefits not only our accommodations, but our restaurants and our small businesses as well. So our legislation, and I remember when we passed this, I was actually in the meeting here in 2011, we're allowed to expend up to a third of our funds on capital projects. It's not mandated in our legislation that we must, but we can, which is why we're coming at this point to create this program now that we're in a financial position that we can expend those. So tourism-related expenditures, like I mentioned, on the right-hand side there, you'll see that expenditures that in the judgment of the TDA are designed to increase the use of lodging, meeting facilities, convention facilities, or to attract tourist or business travelers. And so we get to the application we created. So I spent probably about 6 months researching best practices nationwide, and we got a lot of examples of really terrific applications, but also we got a lot of insight as to making sure that projects are shovel ready when we fund them, so we're not waiting on due diligence. So we spent about 6 months doing staff research, and we worked through it with a committee for about a year to develop this 13-page application. We also engaged a tourism strategist, Magellan Strategy Group, based in Asheville. They've worked with many destinations throughout the country, and they know best practices as it relates to this application. After all that was done, our board reviewed the process. The county attorney and also Darlene Fox, our financial person, reviewed the application as well. And one of our goals is to fund projects that have a useful lifespan of 10 or more years, or new construction, expansion, or renovation that have a total cost of at least $25,000, or a major maintenance or rehabilitation project with a cost of more than $25,000. In a traditional year, we'd recommend 2 cycles, but given that we're starting in February, we're recommending 1 cycle this year. So the application itself, who selects the projects? I know we've got a lot of worthwhile projects, and we've already had interest from some groups in Jackson County for this funding program. But who selects the projects? We put together a pretty broad committee, accommodations operator, so a hotelier or an accommodation owner, a food and beverage operator, an industry representative, a chamber of commerce representative, an arts and cultural rep, a community representative, our board chairman, and a county commissioner. So the process will be that they'll submit an application to the selection committee. They'll review it for completeness and make sure that every box is checked on that application. And then it will go to our full board, and from our full board, we'll make a determination whether to forward it to commissioners for approval. So looking at these, let's start with how each application is scored. So we provide a rubric so that applicants know what the most important components of their application and how they'll be ranked. 20 points for tourism promotion impact, 20 points for room nights generated, 15 points for the scale and capacity to attract visitors. So when we talk about that, is it going to be something that is a driver of tourism, or is it going to be something that people simply do while they're already here? So we want something that attracts people. 10 points for the benefit to the destination, 5 points for enhancing the visitor experience, 5 points for program components, 5 points for quality of research, and 5 points for comprehensive marketing approach. So in addition to the soundness of the project, we also want to make sure they have the capacity to market it to the public. 5 points for suitable market or suitable target market, 5 points for evidence of partnership, and 5 points for the organizational structure and the management capacity. We want to make sure that people taking on these projects have the capability to complete them. So to the right, you'll see our schedule for this year. We'll hold a pre-submittal conference on June 1st, and then the applications will be due 60 days later to the TCPF selection committee. And then from there, they'll review them, answer any questions or ask any questions, and then it will go to our full board. We propose that commissioners would consider an application at a work session. That way, there's some Q&A and we can answer questions. And then if it moves forward, it would go to the Board of Commissioners at a full regular meeting. And then we execute the funding agreement within 30 days of that time frame. So the application adheres to industry best practices. It complies with state and local tax legislation. It manages risk and legal concerns. Every funding agreement that we put together will be custom depending on the applicant as to When we release funds, how often, what milestones are required before we release funds, and we'll be relying on Ms. Fox to make those determinations. By doing so, we ensure the highest and best use of these tax dollars, and the process provides clarity, efficiency, and accountability. So I know a lot of people have asked, but the funding we've included for this first round is $500,000, and we don't have to expend all of that, and we can have multiple applications all considered at once.
But each
So,
application's about one project or whatever.
yes, sir.
If there's two, it's not in that application, it's in the second application.
Right. So they could apply in a future cycle for that. May I answer any questions from the board?
Do you have a projection for the next year's two allocations amounts?
We don't as of yet. It depends on when we did the budget for the remainder of this fiscal year. When we came up with this allocation, we budgeted conservatively for room occupancy tax for the next 7 months. We expect we'll surpass that, meaning we'll go into next fiscal year with a surplus. So we'd like to see this program continue to grow. We will scrutinize these projects to make sure they're really good fits, not just that we use up that pot of money. So if there's money left over from this fiscal year, we'll roll it into next fiscal.
You mentioned greenways, Mr. Breedlove, and I wondered about the feasibility of, can the county apply for some of these monies and expand a greenway, or say, enhance something along the greenway, or?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the appropriate county department would complete an application, whether it's Parks and Rec, whether it's whichever county unit would be interested in those funds.
Okay.
But they would have to complete an application, and our staff is also available to help them assist completing that application.
Good, thank you.
I think a couple of thoughts. I appreciate your comments at the beginning about your presentation, talking about funding for tourism development, and that it is not just targeted for tourists. I really like that, because I know a lot of times my wife and kids, they'll make the comment, they'll say, especially during the summer months when they're out of school, they'll say, okay, while you go to work today, we're going to play tourist. And they'll go downtown and just snap pictures downtown. They'll go eat at a restaurant. They'll walk up and down Main Street. They'll go and they'll do that in different places around the county. And so they like to play tourist and have a great time enjoying our beauty and all the great things that we have to offer here in our local community. And so when we fund projects, when we fund TDA projects, when we invest money in tourism, we're also investing in our local economy, and we're investing in things that people here can enjoy. It's just not something for somebody else to come from away from here. So I really like that aspect, and I think it's important to sell that. And then, like, finally, just the economics of it. I almost look at this as more of an economic piece than it is anything, because we're encouraging businesses to grow. We're encouraging money to go back into our local economy for construction needs. So there's a win-win for everyone here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Strickland, do you have any comments or questions? I'll make sure it's a little bit, you're at a disadvantage when you're remote.
Yeah, no, I'm good, Brian. Thank you.
Okay.
When we put this TDA, combine the two TTAs together to form the TDA, I would have never thought you under your leadership, it would be so successful that we would have these type of funds for the projects. It really is.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Any other comments or questions?
It's exciting opportunity, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Next, we do have Mr. Poston, our planning director, here to talk about proposed UDO amendments. And Mr. Poston did mention that he did not see a time frame.
Well, I can assure him there is one.
Oh, okay. Well, you know,
It's called limited.
I was just trying to get an idea of how much time I really had, so you answered the question.
You typed it already.
Well, sometimes that happens. A lot to me, though. So what I have before you today is some things that I've talked in generalities to you about over the past few months, mainly in conjunction with our 160D amendments that we completed in November. And I think when we were talking about that in work sessions, I let you know that we've been working with the planning board to shift some responsibilities at the planning board, and some of this is part of that shift. And then talking a little bit about the Cashers Planning Council and the work we've been doing in the planning community, knowing that we're having ULI, the Urban Land Institute, come in and talk to us at the end of the month and share some of their expertise with us and the Cashers community about growth and development and how we look at that over time. But we also realize there's some existing development pressures in the area that we think we can address in some smaller ways, and that's what some of these amendments here do, where we've got some broad-based community support to make some changes that we think make the process a little bit better, that clarify some things. So that's what these amendments here are doing today. So I'll go through it pretty quickly, and I'll answer any questions that I can. First, with the Cashers ordinance, we're doing about 7 or 8 different things. Now, we changed the language in a couple different places, but here's what we're really achieving. First thing we're doing is we're defining the application process a little bit better and what's required at the application process. That's never really been defined in that area, so we want to give a more robust type of description of what we expect in the way of information to evaluate projects as they come to us. 2 things I want to mention about that. One is that we've incorporated into, and this pertains to special use permits only, special use permit process. Before they can submit a completed application to the planning department, they have to hold a community meeting. So we think that's an important first step because I think everyone here has been through the quasi-judicial process. You understand that not everyone from the community can come in and participate in that process. It's limited. But in order to provide that opportunity in the Cashers community, the community meeting is that first connection point and allows anybody from the community to participate in that process and understand what the application is going to be once it gets to planning staff. So it's just one way that we can integrate the larger community into these development projects and do that prior to an application being submitted. So it just helps be more transparent and give everyone a better idea of what's actually being requested. The other thing that I'll mention is we've done some additional information like topography. The Planning Council, and I don't think it's included in this one. I think I sent over the unedited one. The Planning Council passed all these amendments with 2 slight changes, and I'll make that change note right now. Is that the topography? We're just going to further clarify that we want 10-foot contour intervals. That's just better defining what we want in the topography when we see that on the site plan. The other one I'll mention in a moment, but. So that's the first step. Is those these issues right in here, and talking through that, and that's all the application requirements, and then we get into we updated our special use thresholds. What for square footage? What size building can you build before you need to have a special use permit? As it exists today, it's 1,500 square feet in either one of our 2 districts. When we start talking about a more robust application process, I think the council also adjusted those numbers. So not every building that's proposed in Cashers would need a special use permit. So what the council is proposing the change to be is a 4,000 square foot maximum before you need a special use permit in the village commercial district, village center district, and a 6,000 square foot building size in the general commercial. So it elevates that from 1,500 square feet. So it does allow, if you want to build a 3,000 square foot building, you could just come to staff and we could process that as a regular zoning permit as opposed to needing to have a special use permit for smaller one building builds. Commissioner Jones will be familiar with it. Come some of the work that Mike Benitez was doing there in small building footprints wouldn't necessarily have to come to the council for a full hearing. It could be done following the rules we already have in place. For the first time, we're proposing a maximum building allowance for cashers. This is something that comes to us from the casher small area plan. It's called a floor area ratio, and what a floor area ratio basically says is that for every square foot of land area that you have, we'll let you build 1.5 square feet of building space. So for easy math, if we did a 10,000 square foot building, our ordinance, or excuse me, 10,000 square foot piece of property, the ordinance, the floor area ratio would allow you to build a 15,000 square foot building. In saying that, that's the maximum that would be allowed. Now, also in that instance, for the 10,000 square foot lot, you'd also need to provide parking and stormwater. So you may not ever build the 15,000 square foot, but it does put a cap, and that's the first time we've actually put a cap. But I think what will be important for cashers is that number moves with the size of the property. The bigger the property, the larger allowance for building size. So it really tries to fit a scale of building to the scale of the piece of property. Yes, ma'am.
I understand about the scale, but it seems to me that the impact of the height of the building might, because the square feet,
Yeah.
there's nothing here about height, right?
Right. Well, the ordinance already has a height limitation, so that's built in. So that's one of the things that would have to be met. So again, just because we say you could consider 15,000 square feet, you also have to meet all the other parts of the ordinance. But it is trying to give a better understanding for developers and property owners what the maximum potential could be, and then what you might choose to build would be based on being able to meet all the standards in the ordinance. But it's a newer concept, but it comes to us straight from the Castor Small Area Plan. We've updated some prohibited uses. The state, over the past few years, we've gotten some more case law. And basically why we're updating our prohibited uses is we can no longer take broad terms to say if we have a table of uses and says, here's where all the uses that we can think of, and here's the district we think they should be used in. It used to be that we used to put a statement in that and said, hey, if your use is not listed in this table, you can't do it. Courts have come back and said you really can't do that. That's too broad. You have to make, if you want to prohibit a use, you need to state that in your table. So we've started to do that process. That'll be ongoing, but we've started to add a few uses in that we don't want to. Yes, sir.
Go back to that 10,000.
Yeah.
Lot.
Mm-hmm.
And you made a comment about a sidewalk or parking.
Mm-hmm.
Would you deduct sidewalks, vegetation, space for vegetation, parking from that 10,000 square foot for your building?
Yeah. So I think what you would do is you'd have to, when you design that property, when you design that building, you have to be able to, in that same 10,000 square feet, not only do you have to fit the building footprint, but you also have to fit the required parking, the required buffers, the setbacks, anything, all the other parts of the ordinance, and meet the height requirements, and of course sidewalk, but that shouldn't impact the building footprint. But that may change how big of a true building envelope you have to put the actual building. And so the floor area ratio is one standard, but it works in concert with all the other standards to help bring in the type of buildings and development that we're looking at through the small area planning process and what we'll continue to evaluate the ULI process.
Thank you.
We have also in these amendments, you'll find that we've required in cashers now for transportation impact analysis. It is the same language that is currently in the Cullowhee ordinance, so we're applying that standard to the cashers ordinance. And basically, it's just going to set a threshold that would require a developer to prepare transportation impact analysis and cooperate with DOT, for larger projects. Much like what in Cullowhee, a small single-family home subdivision would not trigger a transportation impact analysis for the county, but larger mixed-use developments where you have residential and commercial may hit a number of trips per day in that area that would require some additional study and work with DOT to mitigate any impacts. So that's actually written into the ordinance or proposed to be. We've done a little bit, a small amount of work with special use permits, with stormwater. We have a tiered system in Cashers that says, hey, if you're under 5,000 square feet of impervious surface that you're adding to a project, all you have to do is best management practices from the state. If you're over 5,000 square feet, then you have to actually adhere to our stormwater regulations, which require retention and allow the water to settle out and then move on to the next phase. We're proposing that we do away with the tiered system, mainly because any amount of impervious surface you put out there is going to contribute to the stormwater issues out there. So we want you to address it. Now, your stormwater system for a 5,000 square foot impervious area will be smaller than it would be for a larger area, but we still think it's important, given our where we are in Cashers and the development in Cashers, that we're addressing stormwater in a more comprehensive manner and actually having them meet the same standards no matter how large of an impact you're going to have. You need to address the stormwater more than just best management practices. So that's the other thing you'll see. One other note I'll make, just another slight change from the recommendations on the trigger for the special use permit is the 4,000 and the 6,000, but it also, if you're going to start doing multiple buildings that match so if you did two 4,000 square foot buildings, you'd trigger the threshold. We had it at 3 initially, but they wanted to bring it back down to 2. So that's a change that isn't noted in your packet, but is on the screen. And then we just clarify that we aren't, regardless of the size of a single family home on a single property, we're not going to issue a special use permit. That's been our practice. It just wasn't clear, but we're not going to issue special use permits for single family homes. We haven't in the past, but we wanted to clarify that. So that's the Cashers amendments. Also, what you'll find is we've done some work to the subdivision ordinance, and we've really done a couple things here. We've really created a tiered system for our major subdivision approval. Today, major subdivision is defined as any subdivision that has 9 or more lots, or 9 or more buildings, or 60 bedrooms or more. In doing this, we see a lot of projects come through to the planning board, and with the 60 bedrooms, we see a lot of multifamily projects coming through. And the subdivision ordinance, that was done before we had zoned areas and regulated districts that addressed multifamily developments. But it also puts us into a development pattern right now where we have, we're asking a subdivision ordinance to cover multifamily development, and it's not really the right vehicle for that. So the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is some multifamily development regulations. But what we're proposing to do is change the way we review subdivisions a little bit, just for quick understanding purposes. To put more in context into this, the planning board approves major subdivisions right now. In that function, by law, the planning board is acting as an administrative review agency. It's not a legislative one. It's not a quasi-judicial one. They're performing a lot of the same things that staff performs in their review, meaning that they're going to they're being asked to confirm that the ordinance is being applied as it's written in the ordinance. And there's not a whole lot of leeway for the planning board even to deviate from that and say, okay, in this case, we'll allow you to do something different. So that's not really where we're at. So what we're proposing to do is create 2 levels of major subdivisions. One is to allow staff to approve subdivisions and of lesser size. And then we have a threshold at about 100 lots where we require some additional standards from DOT, road design standards and greater standards where more review may be necessary. But the reason why we're asking, and the planning board is asking for the commissioners to consider this, is because you spend a lot of time, our subdivision ordinance spends a lot of time talking about some very technical road design standards, some very technical stormwater standards that we have on staff professionals that can interpret that and apply that. And we're preparing a report for the planning board for them just to say, it sounds like you guys have handled all these issues. And so what that does is take up 20, 30, 40 minutes of planning board time, and they're not able to really focus on some of the policy issues that we really need to talk about as a growing and developing community. So this ordinance will propose, it's 3 parts for the subdivision. We're going to propose to allow staff to approve major subdivisions with the same standards in place up to 100 lots. To do that, removing the bedroom requirement, because we're going to ask you to approve some multifamily development standards. And then, and so we're going to ask you to do that. And then we also have to change the definition section to define what a level 1 subdivision, a level 2 subdivision is. And then we change our process, Article 3 section, to reflect that change as well. Any questions about the subdivision section? Kind of moved through that pretty quick. Yes.
Just for everybody's knowledge, if there's a disagreement with the developer and staff, what is the process?
So it's already built into the ordinance. It's an appeal process. It would be handled like any other appeal process, and it would go to the planning board to be adjudicated.
So just letting you know, there is an appeal
Yeah.
process that will take it back to the planning board.
Yeah. And then the last part that the amendments we have is the multifamily housing section. We've noticed over the years that that multifamily housing doesn't necessarily know a line on a map, but what it does know is where utility lines are, transportation hubs and networks are, and so where you can build a higher density doesn't always match where we have our regulated districts or where the municipal boundaries are that might handle some of these things. So really what we did is we relied heavily on our Cullowhee ordinance and some of its standards and brought that in to the out to the county jurisdiction. And the things that we're talking about as far as regulations and standards are, we want to have a parking standard, we want to have an open space standard, we want to have a setback standard for buildings from adjacent property lines, we want to have vegetative buffering requirements against adjacent properties. We want to take a look at stormwater regulations for those larger developments that have a lot of impervious surfaces, and even some minimal architectural standards, mainly just to make sure the buildings all kind of look alike and are sharing a similar style. What this ordinance doesn't do is it doesn't apply a density standard beyond what we already have set up through the Mountain and Hillside Development Ordinance. And in some cases, if you're in a watershed, obviously those rules would also overlay these. But because it's out in the county and we don't have existing density standards, we haven't put those in other than what's already in place. But we do believe that these standards will help guide more orderly development and address some of the issues that these larger scale developments might bring to some unincorporated and unzoned portions of our county. But it would only deal with this type of development. So we're just kind of targeting those types of issues. Like I said, most all of that this is modeled off the Cullowhee ordinance. It's our newer ordinance with multifamily development and design in mind. So we think it's pretty applicable. The only minor change that we have would be the parking standards. The parking standards in the Cullowhee ordinance are really driven by the fact that we see a lot of student housing. So you may have 4 cars with 1 unit. If you look at outside the county, that may not all be student housing type. So we go back to a more traditional multifamily number. So we are at 1.75 parking spaces per unit, per dwelling unit, which is more in line with some of what you would find in more urban areas and more suburban urban areas for multifamily housing. Preparing for that. Happy to answer any questions about any of these areas.
Cashers Village Center amendments and the subdivision and the multifamily, have those been approved by the Cashers Council?
So the Cashers Council approves, reviews and holds a public hearing and approves the Cashers amendments, and they have done that. The planning board reviews the Cashers, but doesn't have a public hearing. But they do have a public hearing for the subdivision and multifamily, and all those public hearings have been conducted. The planning board and the Cashers Planning Council have recommended approval of these items. Recommended that commissioners consider approving these items, and that's why we stand here today. I would request that if the board is willing, that you consider to on the 15th, next Tuesday, to consider to call for a public hearing on March the 1st. That would be the ask, unless there's any questions that we can answer.
Cashers public hearing, were there many people show up to speak? Do you recall?
We had about 5 or 6 people that actually spoke, and I think some of it was, I think in general, we had a lot of consensus around some of these things, some of these issues. And the reason why we started with these amendments was because we felt like there's some consensus in the community about everyone could agree. Some of the other concerns that are in that community will probably take a little bit longer to figure out where the balance is between, the built and natural environment and how we manage that. So that'll take a little bit longer, but we thought these amendments had enough broad-based support that we can move these forward, and it would enhance what we have today, and we'll continue to work to address the other issues, and we'll looking forward to participating in the ULI process, which will get us to the next step of working through those concerns.
The Jackson County Planning Board, they approved, was that unanimous?
That was unanimous. We didn't have anybody at the planning board meeting that spoke to the amendments, but the planning board was unanimous in their support of both cashers and regular amendments.
I have two questions. The first one, I noticed that the wording on here has changed from schematic to conceptual. I think I know the meaning of those words, but in light of ordinances, what's the difference?
Not a whole. I think conceptual. I think I think what the concern was, conceptual might sound like it's not realistic or and I think schematic would be probably the intended meaning would be that it would be more integrated into the overall design with a schematic type of design. I think that what we're looking for there is to understand where you think, like for water and sewer, where that'll all get in the construction phase, that all gets, surveyed out and engineered to all the numbers. But what we want to really be able to talk about is where do you think is it all water and sewer, public water and public sewer, or is it, or where's your wells going to be? Where's your water source? Understanding where those things are in conjunction. So schematics seem to convey a better sense of what the council was trying to convey, other than the conceptual. So I think it's probably more that than anything else.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other question I had is, we had two people come to speak to us earlier, concerns about, and wanted us to, when they were looking at this plan, Susan Bacardi and Robin, and I can't remember Robin's last name.
Walker, I think is who.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do these address their concerns with, I think it was the height of buildings?
So this
Square feet.
square feet. Yeah. So I think this begins that conversation. That's where the floor area ratio kind of sets. It does set a maximum, for a building based on the size of the property, the maximum building size that could be achieved. I think there's still going to be more work to be done. These amendments here are not able to, address every concern that we've identified. But we felt it was important to start moving in that direction. And these were things that we thought we could make some short-term gains in improving the process, improving some of the design standards, understanding that we will be continuing to work on our regulatory framework in the cashier's area to better keep on giving us a better chance to address development concerns in that changing community. So there's more work to be done. This is a first step. It's not a last step. And so there's still a lot more that we'll need to work through in the coming months.
Thank you.
Don't have a question, but a comment. I like the change of the definitions or the word conceptual and schematic, because many times you've seen a developer or individual come out with a conceptual plan, and when it starts coming together, it doesn't sometimes resemble that drawing.
Yeah.
Schematics kind of nails that, some of the infrastructure things down to a degree
Okay. Thank
of
you.
accuracy, I guess.
Commissioner Striblin, did you have any comments or questions about this one?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does the board feel comfortable that we move forward? Does anybody want to delay putting this up for a public hearing and eventually a vote sometime around the 1st of March? we need more time, or if not, then we'll go ahead and put it on the agenda. Does anyone object to that? Okay, I'm not hearing any nays, so it looks like we'll, at our next business meeting, we'll call for that public hearing then.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, Brian, is that on the desktop? There we go. All right, thank you. You ready? Next item of discussion is in regards to the American Rescue Plan Act. Not necessarily intended for any decisions to be made today. I'm trying to get this on the board's radar for future conversations. As you can see in my memo to the board, the U.S. Treasury has released its final ARPA rules on January 27th, 2022. One significant change in these final rules is they have allowed up to $10 million of these funds to replace revenues. Jackson County's entire $8.5 million can be allocated using this method. These additional revenues, the way this will end up looking on the books, it'll be additional revenues to the books. They can be used for any local government public purpose. And so, excuse me, this will greatly simplify your ability as a board to expend these funds. And I want to be real clear, this is as much for the public as it is for the board. It simplifies it because it removes the federal government's Office of Management Budget procurement and contracting guidelines. But we still have to follow North Carolina laws in regards to procurement and contracting. I'll go into a little bit further detail why it's important that these rules have been removed, because even some of the concepts that the ARPA legislation says we could spend the monies on were going to be complicated under the federal rules. And the reality is there is a portion of the priorities that the federal government says we should spend the monies on that, quite honestly, I don't feel like we could have actually accomplished. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So just a reminder, we've committed 2.1 for a domestic violence shelter and 1.2 for public safety. That leaves about $5.1 million available. Since ARPA has established the final rules, I'm asking the Board of Commissioners to start establishing priorities. Not necessarily, doesn't have to be project specific, but it can be project specific if you have a project, but priorities for these funds. I also just threw in this memo, just a reminder, the basic primary uses of ARPA was to respond to public health emergency or negative impacts, to respond to workers performing essential work. 3, for the provision of government services to the extent of revenue reduction. See, that under that old rules, we couldn't really even use 3, but now we can. We're proposing to utilize that revenue reduction methodology for the entire amount. But then on 4, to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Just a reminder to the board, some of the original conversations early were related to negative impacts of public health emergency. So if you recall, a lot of it was driven to human service functions that ultimately it was decided that any impacts to individuals who are economically distressed or otherwise would automatically be assumed to be impacted by COVID. And so that's how we were able to move forward with things like the domestic violence shelter. You know, if you look at my early memos, I mentioned that Awake had some facility needs that they may want to talk to the board about. And then we also talked about developing a nonprofit application for those who perform human services. Other concepts that have been discussed, and whether it be internally or externally, has been things about building of parks, affordable housing, broadband. And so all of these concepts are, and if you notice I put are or were eligible to be considered with these funds. And what I mean by that is everything that is being discussed here, as we progress through the last year, and that's how long it's taken for these final rules to come out, things like parks started becoming eligible under the old rules, meaning they started talking about public parks as being able to help health determinants and make people healthier, which in essence can improve their lives. So they really started extending definitions of how these monies could be used under human services. So that's how things like building parks and affordable housing had always been kind of a component of that, had been part of that. But I wanted to point out that several of these concepts really wouldn't have been possible under the old rules. And I'm going to use, for example, or if we attempted to do it, it would have had so many restrictions on it, it would have been difficult to be effective. And I'm going to use affordable housing for an example. Under the federal contract and purchasing rules, if you were to buy real property under those rules, then that means that real property would have a permanent restriction on it forever. Meaning, if you ever stop utilizing that property for its purpose, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and sold it, then you would have to pay back the federal government the fair market portion of ARPA monies that you used to participate in that project. So if you used 100% ARPA monies, you would have to pay 100% fair market value back. So if you attempted to buy property and address affordable housing, because we all know affordable housing is about property, at least the start of it as far as affordable property, then that would have limited our ability to work with private developers. It really would have stopped our ability to work with private developers. And so it's things like that, and or if you look at parks, a little bit different. You could have achieved a park, but it would have still been a permanent restriction forever on that park. It would have always had to been a park. And then you can go on and look, even like a Wake. They're looking at some renovations on their property. If we would have stayed under the old rules, I would have recommended to the board that we just use general fund dollars to assist them. For the simple fact that if we would have used ARPA dollars under the federal rules, it would have put a permanent restriction on their property. The other thing that really is helping us too is, we've always had preliminary discussions about having nonprofit application process for nonprofits. So there was a lot of time, staff, myself, Darlene, and I know Commissioner Woody sat through some meetings. We've spent a lot of hours going through trying to learn what we can and can't do with these funds. And I can tell you, it was going to be really complicated to do a nonprofit application. If the nonprofit that got awarded, if they would have been considered a subrecipient, then that nonprofit would have had to have the financial capability of following these federal laws from now on forever. If that nonprofit bought property or equipment or things of that nature, it would have just made this very complicated. Quite frankly, I believe it would have limited applications only from larger nonprofits, because they're the only ones who have the financial and accounting capability of achieving these goals. The other thing under the old rules is that they went, again, I mentioned this, that they bought a vehicle, part of whatever they were presenting to the board. It would have been long-term tracking of that vehicle and things of that nature. Now that we're able to shift the money around, basically, as far as ARPA is concerned, we do revenue replacement. That basically frees up that money for this board to continue on with these conversations, but allows you now to go out if you wish to proceed with some type of nonprofit application process. Now it's just a simpler process. And also it can set us up to make it one-time applications, one-time expense applications versus ongoing expense. A lot of conversation will be held, and it's just going to simplify the process. Other things too, like broadband, we still have all of these state restrictions on broadband, but at least it removes the federal restrictions from these conversations that the board chose to make this a priority too. So just wanted to point out that one of the things I want to do also is talk to the board, and I asked Darlene to talk to you a little bit about what she's going to recommend and what's going to come to you in the next couple of months. And what I mean by that is you'll see some accounting things occurring, okay, that that I just want Darlene to explain to you what she's about to bring to you, so it doesn't seem like a last minute type of thing. But before I turn it over to Darlene, what I'm asking, this is a starting point for this board. I'm asking you in your mind to start thinking in terms of what's a priority. I'm not saying you can't talk about it today, but I am asking, we do have a budget retreat coming February 22nd. And I am asking to prepare yourself that if one of these items are your priority or something else, now's the time to bring it out, even if it's in general terms. Because if you come back and tell me that a nonprofit application process is a priority, then I'm going to myself and I'm going to direct staff to put together an application process. If you tell us that parks are a priority, then we're going to proceed forward and start going down that direction. So having said that, Darlene, you'll talk about just a little bit.
What I plan to do is a budget amendment for the monies that we've already set aside, move them from the special revenue fund to the general fund. And then we'll set up a budget for wages that we will use all of the ARPA monies for. And it'll free up the money in general fund that's already budgeted. And you can budget that without the restrictions from the federal, the state restrictions.
And then you're going to set up a special fund,
I'm
correct?
gonna set up a special fund, it'll still part of general fund, it'll be meshed together in the audit, but it'll continue to be by itself until we finish the funding cycle.
So next 4 years, it'll be a year. So we don't have to figure everything out February 22nd. So the idea being she's going to create a fund, so it'll be tracked. So you'll know it'll just continue as you make decisions. Monies will be removed from that special fund, moved to whatever project that you wish to do, and then it'll just be a means for her to track, so it just doesn't disappear into the general fund and not be seen again. And so, but for now, I think it's great news. I think it's great news with what the final rule. I believe it allows this board and Jackson County to proceed forward with a myriad of types of projects to benefit our community. And it's really up to this board. You can use it for any local government public purpose, and it's up to this board to make a decision on where you think the best to spend it. So, and it unbelievably removes, it really is a big relief in regards to how long you have to track these funds.
Commissioner Woody, did you have a comment or question?
Well, yes, and I appreciate all that information. And having just returned from the state Board of Directors meeting for the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, you can imagine this was a huge topic. And there's 43 counties out of 100 that have less, 10 million or less. So it's a good piece of the state that is going to come under this. And so there was a lot of discussion and recommendation that we follow that procedure that you mentioned. One of the things that stuck out to me was Lacey, who is in charge of this whole ARPA for the commission, North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, mentioned that some of the new laws that had just come in, one was that you could not expend any of your ARPA funds on congregate living. So that, depending on how you define congregate living, that might have made our domestic shelter idea disallowed funding. You know, if people are staying together under one roof, then you can't. And I'm not sure why they brought it up, if they didn't want people spending it on prison expansions or what. There was quite a bit of thoughts about that. But anyway, that's what one of the regulations was that just had been passed.
Just been passed. But
Yeah,
then they
I mean, like the week before. So I think we are in a really good place, and I appreciate that understanding for us.
The beauty I can on that issue, when it was brought to you for the domestic violence, they also had a rule that says if you expended or obligated monies based upon the interim rules at the time, okay, then they would not make you turn it around. And we had gotten, see, that's one of those things that Darlene had gotten, not just opinions from say, the School of Government. We were going through and getting opinions from the federal government. So I can tell you, we were, when the decision was made at the time, and by obligating and bringing those ordinances in front of you, what it did was it put us in a position that even if the rule changed, there was anticipation that some of the rules could change, and they basically had a rule or law that said if you expended those funds or obligated those funds based upon interpretations at the time, you would have been allowed to continue forward. And so what's interesting, but for now, you're exactly right, because we're able to do the revenue replacement, it just simplifies everything drastically.
Any other thoughts or comments about this presentation?
Well,
So Mikey, there's no regulations against it. When we talk about all budget, there's no regulation about using this money.
Other than our normal regulations.
Other than us making sure that money is being used in a very useful and frugal way or whatever, correct?
Correct.
Correct, yes.
well, and I really like the idea, and Chairman Matt Mahan had mentioned this earlier, that we have it set up in a separate fund so that we can be accountable to our community on our thoughtful use going forward.
Very good.
I'll just mention, I'm really pleased to see the word broadband on this list.
Mhm.
It was one of the number one requests
Yes.
throughout my time, the last 4 or 5 years. And I remember the gentleman from Charter Spectrum said that we'd have to have some skin in the game once they spent their 16 million or whatever it was. It was around a 10% match. So I just kind of keep that in the back of our minds. We don't know what's the other 10% of that was going to be for projects. Where's that 10% going to take us, broadband and internet in our community? What road do we go down to provide that service? So I just kind of think that's great news, and a 10%, $1 million would get us 10 million from them.
Yeah.
Is that right? My math's right.
And where is a very real number, because when they came and spoke to you, he was anticipating these rules to come. You know, we had Ms. Henry appear before you, and what's going to be a very real grant process is the CAD program. If you recall, she was saying that it's the 400 million, the statewide, that we're guaranteed to get 4 million for our county. That when they come out with the rules, it's anticipating that the counties have skin in the game. That's where, if you recall, Miss Henry was telling the board that that program is really designed to get priorities from the elected body, the county, along with partnerships with private entities, and then that's how those monies would be expended. And I can't recall at this time if there's not. Do you know there's not a known match at this point? I don't think the rules have come out. I guess my point of telling you that, Mark, is that there's going to be a program coming out that's allocating $4 million to Jackson County. That, you know, it's up to you. If you say it's a priority, then there will eventually be applications put together based upon your priorities that would require county match.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Okay. 3B, bond attorney engagement letter.
Yeah. Next two items really are related. This is what I'd mentioned to you in my manager's report last Tuesday. Bear with me. You have basically two agreements proposals in front of you. One of them is from Sanford Holzhauser firm. That is to be our bond attorney for the indoor pool project. The proposed cost is $30,000. Ultimately, when you scroll through and look at the scope of services, Bob Jessup is our main bond attorney through Sanford Holzhauser. He will go through the entire process with us, but at the end of the day, The reality is you can see this first sentence. He says, as bond counsel for Jackson County, we prepare the appropriate financing documents and coordinate the financing process with the county, including bond purchaser, LGC, and the county financial advisor. But at the end of the day, what we're paying Mr. Jessup for is, if you look at the bottom here, is that legal opinion. Because we do have to have, it is a requirement to have bond counsel to come in, review the documents, and provide legal opinions on the documents themselves. And so ultimately, if you sit there and look, they will also review this next page, review and prepare and approve any other description of the official statement, the terms, the bonds, and the financing documents, and our legal opinion. The final thing I want to point out on this agreement is, if you just go to the bottom of that page, this cost is anticipation of the county having a county financial advisor. If we didn't do a county financial advisor, then our attorney would have to spend more time and be involved in this, and this cost would change. And so that is the next requirement. If you go to the next tab, it is requested that the board consider a financial consultant engagement letter with Davenport. And when you go through Davenport, you look at this engagement letter, they do list out their scope of services. Um, Again, I'll try not to read everything, but it does prepare a detailed financing calendar. 2 is coordinate the due diligence, and issuance process with the local government commission. 3, and this is all important, but it's incorporation of county staff and LGC in the bond counsel system, reviewing the bond orders, the issuance, sale resolutions, preliminary, final, official statement, notice of sale, and other related bond documentation. Really, 4 and 5, everything that I've stated here, you, honestly, we have good financial staff that can really do all that work. But the reality is 4 and 5, in my opinion, we're paying for all of this, but 4 and 5 is really the meat of the work. And 4 is coordinate all aspects of rating agency interactions. The next steps after we hire the bond attorney and we also hire this firm is we have to start going through the process of getting a rating. Okay, and the rating, the higher our rating, your AAA, things like that, the higher our rating, the better interest will be on the bonds themselves. The more money we will save. And really, you look at all of this work here, they are preparing and helping us coordinate through the rating agencies. And then also, if you look at 5, they're also assisting in preparing for and conducting the public sale security. So they're helping us sell the bonds too. Now, the local government commission, really, that's where it officially goes through. But the reality is you can ask Darlene, this is really trying to help take work off our staff. And then we also need the expertise of someone coming in and helping us do this. We did do a lot of research for this firm here, and we've got a lot of high recommendations from multiple counties, also from our bond council. We approached LGC about them, so they're a high reputable firm that we're pleased to move forward with. And the proposed cost of this is $65,000. So at this point, if you recall, just a reminder to the board, we had budgeted around $250,000 total for closing costs. This will take us up to 30 and 65 to around 95, plus some other costs. If you see in there, let's just say 100. The next major cost coming to us regarding this is when we get ready to sell the bonds. We don't really pay the rating agency until we actually sell the bonds, but the rating agency itself will be almost $100,000, just the cost associated with the rating agency. And then when you take a handful of the other costs, that's the reason we've always said I put in 250, but we're hoping we keep that down to 225, somewhere in there. So between 200 and 250 is where we'll end up when this is all said and done.
And so these will need action when?
If pleases the board, next meeting.
At our next meeting, okay. Any questions about these 2 engagements between the bond attorney or the financial consultant?
Like me, we're helping the economy.
The financial sector, for sure. Any other questions or comments? Okay, then we'll place that on the agenda for consideration at our next meeting.
Yes, sir.
domestic violence shelter?
Um, yeah, I'm still working on that, so I'm gonna bring that back before the board. I'm
Okay.
still going through the final selection and contract negotiation.
Okay.
Next item is the volunteer fire department rescue squad equipment match. Um, what I'd like to do, just real quick, I put in a set of minutes, and I just want to maybe go over a little bit of history with the board, and then, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you for additional conversations. But what you have enclosed in your packets is the set of minutes held on from at least a portion of the minutes from May 11th, 2021. And what I'd like to do is start your attention off about where my pointer is here for that bullet point. This was a conversation being held about volunteer fire department, just budgets in general. If you recall, I had attended a meeting with fire chiefs, and I brought back several items and discussions that were held with the fire chiefs. And so ultimately, where this bullet point is, where my pointer is here, there's portion of that conversation with the fire chiefs where they had a need regarding personal protective equipment, and it was requested that the commissioners consider matching grants that they may submit grants to, and just matching those grants in order for them to go out and purchase personal protective equipment. At the time, we weren't sure what the maximum grant amounts would be. So I think we were using the number $50,000 that the county would match up to $50,000 to any type of grants. And so you can see there was a discussion in regards to if the county could be prepared to spend $50,000 per department. And I believe that's the four plus, because the town, I don't think necessarily had applied for it. So that's the four plus the rescue squads. I think that's where the number came from. And so ultimately, the idea was that this would initially be a one-time expense. And at the time, if you go down and look at the first sentence of the next page, I think Commissioner Jones had asked, is this something we would budget at the time? And and what I'd stated was because of the time, and we just didn't know what they would be looking for. We didn't even know that they would be applying for grants and so forth at the time. It would take some time for the fire department to find out what other funding sources were available, and if all the chiefs agreed, uh, what grants they'd go after, and so forth. So at that point, instead of setting funds aside, we did have a good fund balance, and that the board could go ahead and set this and do this at a later time if that was their intention. And so at this point, the chairman has approached me. I believe the fire chiefs have met, and that there are some state grant opportunities that are coming fairly soon. And I'll turn it over to you for that kind of discussion.
Yeah, and my conversation with Don was in following up on this conversation we had as a board last May, that if the county was willing to provide that match to the state grant for these PPE upgrades, and we're talking about, there's a tremendous need right now for air pack, the SCBA unit replacement for the bottles. That's the biggest factor that most departments are trying to figure out ways to come up with the money. Most departments in this county receive the federal grant, the AFG grant through Homeland Security several years ago, and those dollars have dried up and they are not available. And so it's put departments in a position to try to come up with $40,000 and $50,000 to place these bottles that have aged out, because there is a federal requirement on they have to be replaced at 15 years. The good news is the bottles that they have now that you can replace them with are 30-year bottles. So the life expectancy has extended from 15 years to 30 years. So that takes us quite a ways down the road. And so my conversation with the county manager the other day was, we need to revisit this, make sure this board is still committed to helping match those grant requests, because those grants need to be submitted to the state by March 1st. And I know we have on our schedule a March 10th work session to talk about budget for emergency services. And I think the thought was at that time was let the departments come and bring those numbers. Yes, we applied for the state grant and it's this amount of money and this would be the match, so that we as a county could prepare for next year's budget to make sure appropriate funds were allocated to provide that match. But in fairness to the departments in this county, it would be more appropriate if we at least sent them a letter saying, we do intend to help match, so that when they submit these applications, they do so knowing that they're going to receive some assistance in next budget year without submitting a grant, not knowing whether or not they're going to be able to help. It helps make a decision on how much you can financially afford as a department. I know, for example, I can speak perhaps of Balsam as chief. Our intention is it's a $60,000 state grant, and we intend to apply for the full $60,000 state grant, which would require $30,000 of a local match. And that is to try to replace these bottles that are aging out, that we got 1 year left on life expectancy. So that's what I wanted to bring up to make sure this board was still committed to this, what we talked about back in May, and so that we can communicate this to the departments so that they have a little guidance as they try to make these grant applications.
And so just to clarify, especially for me, it's a total budget of 60,000. That would be $30,000 from the state, which is the maximum total budget amount that can be submitted. And then it would be $30,000 from another funding source.
Correct.
So that's where it's not a I was pointing out that at the time when this was being discussed back in May, we weren't sure what the maximum would be. We had discussions about up to 50. What we're talking about here is up to 30.
Up to 30, that's correct.
So how much does the Boston Fire Department need to replace all your tanks?
Well, it's going to take the 30. It's going to take the local match of 30. We're going to have to apply for the full 60. And that's still not going to get everything this year, but it gets everything that will be.
In addition to the tanks that the fire department needs.
Say that again.
This just for our tanks?
This is just for our tanks.
It's gonna cost $60,000.
Absolutely.
And how many are they?
We have 43 tanks, and they're about $2,500 a piece.
And they're gonna last though 30 years.
Mhm.
Wow.
And all the others are running out. They're
Savannah Fire Department's in the same boat.
Aging out.
Canada, Koala, all of us got the federal grant at the same time, and all of these are aging out. So that's the question that all of us are scratching our heads trying to figure out: how do we come up with the funds to do this? On an average year, Balsam Fire Department will apply for about $20,000 worth of equipment. Usually about a $10,000 to $15,000 is what we have available in our budget to pay matching funds for. And when you're asking to come up with 30, it's a much larger number.
Does all 43 tanks, do they age out at once? Or
No, that's why we're just going to be able to
Okay.
get the ones that we need for next year.
how many is that?
Well, I don't have the exact number with me, but I can get you the number.
So as Brian was mentioning, he and I discussed it, and I had put this on the agenda. March 10th is when also Town of Silva is going to come and speak to the board about their operations and wanting to go full time. It's really going to be an emergency services type conversation. It's when Glenville Cashers Rescue is going to come and talk about their EMS service and also talk about their facility. So really that day is turning into an emergency services conversation. So when Brian had mentioned this to me, I said, well, that would be the perfect time. But and that's before we knew about the deadline for the grant. And so then the reality is I think, as Brian was saying, we can still ask them to come to detail out the grants, meaning to let you know that they've applied for 43 bottles, or they may have some other personal protective equipment.
We just, for example, like I say, I speak on behalf of myself, our department. We applied. We able to replace our turnout gear, Not fully yet. We were able to get the pants and the coats on the state grant last two cycles. We did it in two sections. We still lack helmets. That's another thing we're trying to, because, unfortunately, there is a expiration date on these items. And you have to replace them by the expiration date. Our helmets need to be replaced, our no-max hoods need to be replaced, and our boots need to be replaced to meet the federal guidelines. So that's something we're working on through other funding options to try to come up with the money to pay for those and to get those all cycled out.
So this is something that a couple of years ago, when the chairman and I was just having some conversations about strategies on how to work with nonprofit volunteer boards, the volunteer fire departments. One of the strategies that I kind of brought up to him was to talk about these state grants. That generally speaking, now occasionally they will go for larger pieces of equipment, but what I've seen generally speaking is that's how they keep up their personal protective equipment. Okay, meaning what you're talking about, the helmets and the bottles and so forth. And so ultimately, I've been involved in other places where the county has gotten involved to basically just take away the burden of fundraising for the personal protective equipment. And what I've seen is if you participate in this for a couple of years, it tended to not always be the maximum of grant. You can only replace bottles so many times. You can only replace, even though the helmets have a lifetime and turnout gear has a lifetime, it's not a 2-year lifetime. It's an extended lifetime.
Right.
So if you do a strategy such as this over a shorter period of time, within, I don't know the amount of years, I'm just going to throw an example, but within a few years, what you will see is that these grants going to the state will really reduce a lot, because at that point they've replaced everything that they can possibly replace. And from a public investment standpoint, I've always been in favor of this, because this is really helping them in personal protective equipment. There's nothing really more important to the individual volunteer than the equipment that actually protects them when they're actually fighting a fire. And so the reality is that's what really brought this up a year ago, as starting the conversation.
I think we should.
What's the board, anybody object to it? I mean, what's your thoughts? Because here again, I don't want to apply. Well, I understand, but I don't want to, I want to be able to tell other departments, yes, the county is willing to help you out on this match.
Yeah.
So they know what to budget, because if all of a sudden, some departments may be in the position to say, well, if the county can't help us out with the $30,000 match, then we're going to have to order less equipment and find other ways to fund it.
I thought, I'll go first, let's tell them to move forward. We just found out we've got $5 million that we can spend any way we want to today. And if we have to go part of that, we have it.
So
Well, I feel that same way, Commissioner Jones, and I feel like this is one of the services we provide our community, and there's a fire station in each community, and some have satellites. So we're covering our whole county, and that's really important.
And when we talked about this before, and I think as Don sort of alludes to in the minutes about the timing, the deadline to submit the grant request is March 1st. The state will review the grants, and you just can't spend this money on anything. The state has a list of eligible items. They recognize that you can't go out here and buy flashing lights and light bars and a whole bunch of other things. This has to be targeted towards certain unique items that are like
Safety.
the PPE safety issues. So they'll make a determination whether or not they can fund, who they can fund and at what level. And then the state will make the announcement of that award on May 15th. Then the departments after May 15th, if they receive the announcement letter, yes, we've approved your application, the departments can move forward with the purchase of the equipment. And then you have to have the receipts, the invoices into the state by September. to show that you use the funds for the intended purpose, and here's the receipts and the invoices to prove it. So it goes into the next budget year. At the time when we first talked about this, we didn't think about the 5 million. We were thinking if we had to fund this out of a general fund expenditure, this would put it into next budget year. So that's why this whole conversation is timed the way it is. But if we end up using the 5 million, it's irregardless when it is.
Does it help the fire departments get the grants approved if they have the county match going into the grant?
The state doesn't really care who matches or how it's matched, as long as you can match it. That's a requirement.
I mean, under the same logic, what we're talking about now, since it's a max of $30,000, then it's how many departments? 6 times 30. Is that that's the maximum amount that we're talking about versus the 250. So
And everyone may not apply for the full amount. I don't know what other people's full needs are.
yeah. So
When you replace turnout gear, you replace it for everybody?
Well,
You know,
no.
I was in the fire department, and if a fella, we hired a man or brought a man in this week, new fireman. When we ordered him turnout gear, and he got brand new turnout gear, a brand new helmet, everything comes with it. And all at once, he's a new fireman, and he's wearing this brand new stuff, and our fella's wearing stuff at 3 or 4 years old. But we didn't take the 3 or 4 years old off this fella and give it up. Fella got new, but in 2 or 3 years, I never did remember us just deciding we was gonna buy all new turnout gear for everybody. Is that something you do now?
Well, we can't afford
When
just
we
to.
had to have
No.
new turnout gear, we ordered 4 sets of turnout gear or whatever.
Correct.
You not do that now?
Let me clarify for you.
Okay.
All right. NFPA says the turnout gear has got a life expectancy of 10 years.
Right.
When and this is a whole process that you get involved with the State Department of Insurance, who regulate fire departments. As chief, I have to sign a statement to say that we have turnout gear that meets the federal requirements. So no, we just don't go buy new gear at any point. We have to buy it to replace what's fading out. Exactly. That's what we try to do.
You ain't down to buy 25 sets.
No, we've tried to buy it, and the same way with the bottles. It's a blessing and a curse when you get a big grant, like the federal grant, because we bought all bottles at the same time, so that means they all have to be replaced at the same time. In an ideal world, you'd buy 5 this year, maybe 5 next year, 5 the next year, and you could phase it in. But that's what happened with this federal grant. When everybody got it, we were able to replace all of it at one time because we all had equipment that was outdated.
so
But now turnout gear, we've been able to phase it in, so we don't have to buy everybody a set of turnout gear in 1 year.
and I think that's what can be presented to the board. I don't know about what I've seen in other fire departments is they will have that replacement schedule. That's the reason I mentioned over a 3-year period, if we were to go through a process like this, it would not only be turnout, it'd be every piece of equipment that they have that generally, if they have an end of life, you don't replace it just because you can replace it. You replace it because it's within the end of life of it.
I understand that.
Yeah, and so if you do it over a strategy to do this over a 3 to 4 year period, what happens is you end up getting all of your personal protective equipment or the majority of it replaced. And I do need to change something. I think I misquoted here. I believe we were only looking at the time when we discussed this last year. Coley hadn't gone full time, so we're talking about 5 fire departments, not necessarily rescue squads. That's where at 50,000. That's where we were looking at the 250. Now, the reason I say 6, now we're talking about 4 because Coley's full time. But you and I was talking about this may want to be extended. The rescue squads, are they eligible?
They're eligible for the same grant.
For the same grant. So that's where the 6 times 30 comes, is 4 fire departments and offering this up to the rescue squads, I say. Yep.
So I think what I was requesting today is the board was still comfortable with possibly coming up with a match. And here again, I don't know what each department's needs are. I do know that the majority of the departments, it's right now these air bottles. Then it would be nice if Mr. Adams could do a letter to the departments to say that this board intends to assist you with that match. And please be prepared to share with us March 10th what your state application was, so that we can have an idea, and it gives them some assurance too to go ahead and apply for what they need. I'm not hearing any objections to that. Commissioner Striblin, did you have any comments?
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did I go through okay there?
Yes, you got through loud and clear. Thank you, sir.
Okay, good.
Now we're down to other business. Tom, while you had the microphone on, do you have anything else today to submit?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman, I don't.
Okay. Commissioner Jones, do you have any additional items you want to bring up today?
Sir, thank you.
Commissioner Woody?
Yes, I received this email from Bernadette Peters, who's the chair of the Main Street Silva Board. And she wanted me to read this to the commissioners. Dear Commissioners, the Main Street Silva Association and Board wishes to express gratitude to Jackson County for helping make Silva a beautiful and economically healthy town. With a large tourism economy and relatively small population and tax base, we could not have such a vibrant town without partners like you. Just a few shout outs to your team. We are so appreciative of Randy Cabe and his team for so many reasons, but most recently for rebuilding the greenhouses that were removed at Green Energy Park. We rely heavily on the Silva Garden Club to plant and maintain our planters throughout downtown. Randy's team has graciously supplied many of those plants to them. We were scrambling to figure out a strategy, and Jackson County came through for us. Next, Mike Poston and his planning department team has also been invaluable to the Main Street Silva Association in town. Mike is our MSSA board president and has served on the board and Economic Vitality Committee for several years. His input and hard work are invaluable to the success of our downtown district. Our partners with the Parks and Rec Department and Rusty Ellis have been essential in our Main Street program's success. Rusty's involvement on the board and Economic Vitality Committee, in addition to our collaboration on events and programs like Concerts on the Creek, has allowed us to have a much more robust offering downtown. Tiffany Henry in Economic Development has been a great resource and tackles the big initiatives that we would not have the bandwidth to do. She continues to be an invaluable resource to the MSSA. Other indispensable partners that we work with on a regular basis who have contributed significantly to our success are Nick Breedlove with Jackson County Tourism, Julie and Kelly Donaldson with the Chamber of Commerce, Southwest Commission, and he named several people, WCU specifically Sandra Dennison, Wendy Cagle, and Teresa Cruz Paul. SCC, specifically Marnie Harris with Small Business Center and Mike Despero in Career Services, and the amazing organizations that make a significant impact on Silva, like the Garden Club, Jackson County Public Schools, Water, Jackson County Farmers Market, Jackson County Arts Council, and many more that I've missed, but value so much as we work together. Thank you again for all you do in making Jackson County amazing and contributing to Silva's growth and continued improvement. Bernadette Peters, Main Street Economic Development Director.
Anything else, Commissioner Woody?
No.
Commissioner Deets, do you have anything to bring up today? I do have three things that I want to bring up. The first is I know Commissioner Woody and I had a lunch meeting the other day. And one of the things that we talked about, and I know I've talked with Don about, it's time for us as a county to re-look at our long-range capital projects list, and something that we need to, as a board, take a look at this year to start the process of putting together a long-range capital projects a list that we sometime back, almost 5 years ago now, approved as a board. And one of the things that we can do as we put together this major capital project list, as we do some planning and looking ahead to the future or what the future needs of this county are, is also to include in this list, create another category, some minor projects. And I think in light of the American Rescue Plan monies, in light of what was the fund that came out before ARPA? CARES Act. I mean, we've seen several opportunities from the federal government over the last 2 years where funding has been made available, passed down through state governments to put state government in an opportunity and a position to be able to all of a sudden fund shovel-ready projects. So I think what the goal is we develop our long-range major project list. Let's also think about minor projects, some smaller projects that we could detail out, create some briefs, some one-page summaries of those projects. And then when those opportunities present themselves, when our legislative delegation all of a sudden says, well, we've got $1 million of funding that has come available, where can we spend this money to help our region? Then we can say, well, here's an idea. I know recently it's been announced several of our neighboring counties received funding that all of a sudden became available in the state budget. And so they benefited from being ready to present those ideas. And so that's what Commissioner Woody and I talked about. This is an idea she had. I think it's a great idea. It gives us an opportunity after we get this list developed, let's have an opportunity where we invite our delegation to sit down with us. We'll sit down with our state delegation, our senator, our House representative, sit down with those two gentlemen and talk about on the state level what our needs are, hand them this packet and say, look, if you have monies that come available and you're looking for things that you need, how you can spend those funds in your district, here are some great opportunities to help the people of Jackson County. Same way with our federal delegation. We'll provide this list to them. So I think it's something that we can work on over the course of the budget season and put together these lists, meet with our delegations and give them a copy of these plans, and maybe they can help us out on some of them. Mr. Woody, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, Linda Sussman, who's the mayor, mentioned to me that they had an opportunity to get $3 million because our state, the Speaker of the House, well, actually, the Speaker of the House talked to our representative, Mr. Mike Clampett, and he said, we've got some money, and if you can get a project in 1 day turnaround. And so he called Linda, which was a wonderful thing, and they're getting $3 million to do that project, which we really need on Allen Street, which is going to help our whole county, but it is in the limits of Silva. And that was a 1 day. Unfortunately, they had all their ducks in a row. It was ready. They sent it in 1 day. It got funded. So that just led me to think in terms of what Chairman Matt Mahan said.
So as we go through this process, Don, I know it's sort of expand a little bit upon what we've done in the past with the major and sort of add these minor projects. I know we've got a lot of them already that we can just add to the list, and there may be others. That may be something you want to ask departments as we put goals together. Are there things that, like a wish list, that if, that could enhance services, that could enhance our community if we had available funding for.
So I'll go ahead and do that. Just for the board's knowledge, we have been doing work for a lot of the parks. You know, we've been concentrating on the smaller projects. There's going to be some detailed information being presented to the board in regards to certain areas and parks and so forth, because those have been what's been concentrated on, at least publicly and private conversations. There are also some other smaller projects I know that I can probably give a one-page description. I don't have the cost associated with it, but if it's a priority from the board, we'll take it from there. And I'll go out to departments and see if they have any minor capital needs also.
And I just have one more thing. I thought I had two, but I just have one. And I'm going to step down to the podium so I can use the computer. I need to share something. Oh, is it there? I have to get my glasses up where I can see. I'm going to talk to you as a private citizen, not as the chairman of the commissioners.
Okay.
I own a piece of property that I recently acquired. It's at the end of Willits Road. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here. Tom, can you see these?
I can.
Okay. All right, good.
I lost you there for a minute, but I've got you back now.
Okay. So just to orientate everyone where I'm talking about, this is US 74, where the cursor's moving. This is the Jake Paris Bridge as you enter the Willits Strait. This road that goes underneath the Jake Paris Bridge is Dark Ridge Road, right here. And then this is Willits Road that comes down. For those of you that are here before the 4-lane was built, this road used to go across and continue up to here. That was the old highway, the old 1923. I live right here where the pointer is. And then my parents live here. This is my great-grandmother's house. So this is sort of where we live, our property. And I acquired this piece of property about a year ago, which contains, I think I shared with some of y'all, the Love Cemetery, which is one of the oldest cemeteries in our county, which is up here. And that's the main reason I got this property, because I've got generations upon generations of family buried there in that cemetery. But one of the problems that we're having is, along this section of State Road, there used to be a barricade right here where the pointer is. And it kept people from going up in here to this dead end area. And the state, when they came in and replaced the Jake Paris Bridge a couple of years ago, they needed at that time to have access up here to get to the bridge, to do survey work and do part of the bridge replacement. So they took down that barricade and they never put it back. And it's just a constant flow of traffic that goes up here to this dead end area that's sort of out of sight, out of mind. And you can imagine all the things that happen at a dead end road. And you can talk to the sheriff about all the things that happen up here at the end of this dead end road. So let me close this out. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures. Did I just... Oh, thank you. Is that still sharing? Okay. So here's picture number one. This is a driveway that turns in, that goes up to a single family residence. Right here is where that barricade used to be. Now, the school bus turns right here. School bus pulls in and backs up into this old state road and then leaves out. And that barricade used to be right here, and people could go no further up than that. So if I can manage this pointer. There's picture 2. I had approached the state and I said, well, can y'all put the barricade back? Because we need to stop people from going up there. And Wanda Austin, division engineer, she said, well, let's talk about another option. Because I said, I'll put a gate up. I'll pay for a gate. I just want to keep, because there's drug deals going on up here. People are dumping trash. There's all sorts of things happening. And she said, well, let's talk about abandonment because we really have no need for this. And so right here, as you first turn up the road, people bring up their wood, brush. It's unreal the amount of brush. During the day while I'll be at work, somebody will go up there in a pickup truck and just back up there and push off a load of brush.
Yeah, free place to dump.
Free place to dump that they don't
Unreal.
have to pay for. There's some trash. There's another pile of trash. It's a big rubber hose that covered some kind of wiring, I guess. But this is just a dump, and this is after it's been cleaned up. The mattresses and all that stuff's already been picked up, and this is what happened since then. So anyhow, I wanted to explore the option of abandoning it. After I'd asked Wanda about doing just the barricade, and she said, well, let's talk about abandonment. So here is the email that they sent me. And that just sort of details the DOT talking about what they're suggesting be abandoned. Here's the same map I showed you from the parcel report, just highlighting the area to be abandoned. And Wanda asked Chris Lee if he would take a look at it. She says, Brian McMahon's interested in requesting DOT abandon this. Would Chris Lee take a look at it? And this was his response to Wanda. Wanda, I investigated this request to abandon the last 0.08 miles of State Road 1537, Willits Road in Jackson County, and find it to be reasonable. I asked Jackson County Maintenance if this road and turnaround served any operational needs, and they said no. There are no buses or mail carriers that use the last 0.08 miles of state road, and I see no resident access that would be lost. And so to move forward, I would need to sign a petition asking for it to be abandoned, and then the County Board of Commissioners have to vote on a resolution asking the state to abandon it. And so the petition was included, and if I can get back there, I prepared the petition. I'm the only landowner. I own both sides of the road. Jackson County, it's the last 0.08 miles, and I signed it, and it comes before this board. Now, I'll let Heather sort of share with you what the procedure would be if we were to move forward.
The procedure is once DOT accepts the petition, it actually then comes to the planning department for the planning director to do a report. It would be a short one in this case because Commissioner or Chairman McMahon does own both sides of the road. And so there aren't other properties to look at. But basically the report that comes from your county staff is to show that there's nobody that's losing access, that's going to lose their right of way. And that's important. And then at that point, that would be presented to you with a resolution for approval. And once that's done, it goes back to DOT for abandonment and what they have to do on that at that point. There was an abandonment that you did with regard to the Millennial Campus. What was that, about a year or so ago? And it's a similar process, except in this case, it's a little easier because there's only one property owner.
Yeah. And you know, given the fact, my concern is because of all the traffic It's just like a beehive, the continual traffic. If I called 911 every time a car went up there, it would be all day long. And the sheriff, he and I've talked about this, he's in favor of it and said he's willing to come and say that. It just it eliminates one more place for people to go do things they shouldn't be doing. As a member of the board, and this is where also Heather said, I have to recuse myself because obviously I have an interest here.
There's a conflict of interest. It's pretty apparent. So yes, he would need to officially recuse himself, and we will handle that procedure at the time, and then the rest of you could vote on the resolution.
And that's why I wanted to present this today, put all the pictures up, be very transparent about what I'm asking. I really don't gain anything other than the fact that I'm going to be able to put a gate up. The school bus does turn there. I would talk with the state to make sure that we put the gate far enough up to allow the school bus to be able to turn. Heather was willing to check there is a natural gas pipeline that goes underground through there, just making sure that there aren't any issues with that. If they need a key, the state needs a key, whoever needs a key, just people don't need to go up there and dump trash and do drug deals. That's the people we don't want up there. Any questions?
Is this state property or your property?
Well, it would be mine at that point from the gate on. But if the state needed to go up there, there's no question, or
It's your property.
it'd be mine.
What we're doing, getting
And rightfully it should be.
Anybody object to me moving forward to this?
Not at all.
I'd sure like to see something happen. All you have to do is drive down that same road all the way to Addy. And there, them same pictures you got there, I can drive down there today and show you piles of brush down there. Different places and trash in different places and mattresses and a couch, a great big couch right across that bridge from Fred Mulls. So, they're not just dumping it.
Oh, I know.
They're dumping
Yeah.
all of us dumping there.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
There's a couch there right now, that bridge, somebody's going off.
Yeah. Well, I've got the petition. Do I need to submit that to y'all, or do I send it to?
It goes to DOT. You could send us a copy at the same time, and we can be working on ours
Okay.
at the same time.
All right. Well, I'll turn in the petition and at least start the process, and then it'll come back before the board to officially vote on it at some point in the future.
All right.
He went past his 3 minutes.
Oh, my
He
goodness.
went past his 3 minutes.
Oh, Lord.
I was gonna bleep you, but no, I didn't even notice, but. That's funny.
I don't have anything else unless someone else has anything. Have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.